the reason we're having this conversation is a study came out recently and was kind of put forward in our community, the old CrossFit community, that was very positive when it came to its findings on CrossFit, but at the same time had some deep flaws. And I think the thing that we go to in I think all of what makes CrossFit so amazing is that like we're very results oriented and we're looking to the outcome of things. So we're never process oriented, we're outcome oriented. We always want to get to the end state and see what's happening. And part of that is data. And we talk about that with logbooks and we talk about that with all the stuff that we do. But there's also studies, and studies are awesome and they can support what we do and they can detract from what we do. But studies can be deeply flawed. and even though this is something that like supports what we do in CrossFit, and probably anecdotally we can be like, oh, this makes total sense. It's important to, no matter what direction it's coming from, whether it's supporting or detracting from CrossFit, to look deeper. And the reason that you and I are chatting about this is because you saw this study in the same place I saw it posted, and you were very quick to be like, yeah, cool, but terrible study. And so I was like, hell yeah, let's jump on a call and unpack it a little bit. So specifically what we're talking about is, and I'll bring it up here. I think I can share.
That'd be really sweet if you can screen share the actual study.
I will. And it's this one right here. Boom, boom. Let's see. Where is that one? Share. Screen. This one. Share. Cool. You getting that one in there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it.
This is it. So the study is the Lidzen Publishing Inc. and a CrossFit participation and medication use observations from a UK population survey. So it's essentially it's trying to. What was that?
I said that's great. You've got the whole thing there. I was afraid it would just be the abstract, but it's all there. That's great.
No, it's all here. The whole thing's here, but it's essentially talking about it's a survey-based study talking about trying to get a list of people doing CrossFit and self-reporting whether or not they decreased medication use, I believe, is the general gist of it. When they started the study, or when they have they observed a reduction in using medication? And observationally, and as it stands, like that was what it was saying, is like there's a decrease in medication use. But I asked you to kind of compile a list for me of the things that you found not as ideal about this. And so I'd like to kind of just work through that with you. Like
yeah, let's do it.
So you essentially, papers overall disorganized, poorly written, not an important experiment, and here are the 3 big points to be made. So what do you mean by not an important experiment?
First of all, I want to say that I want as much positive evidence for CrossFit out there as possible. So the things that are being said in the study, I definitely want them to be true, and I want to leverage as much positive. I'm biased towards CrossFit, but in that, like you were talking about, I think that yes, one of the strengths we have as a community is being super critical and having standards. And so, when we're dissecting the study, I want it to be bulletproof, so that if anybody is to hold this up and use it as a reason to do CrossFit, there are minimal to no arguments against it. So every time I look at something like this, I'm like, okay, what holes can I poke in this that someone else might poke in it? If I was to say, hey, look at this study, it says that, CrossFit brings down medication, for an example.
Right.
So the question being asked is essentially, like we said, does exercise make people healthier? And the measures they're using, the input and the output that they're using there is CrossFit is the exercise, and the measure that they've decided to use to see if it makes people healthier is are they getting off of their medication?
Mm-hmm.
How they decided to measure this, you talked about it. It's a questionnaire. It's an observational study. It's a self-reported questionnaire, and it's not an important experiment from the standpoint is that we can kind of already know that CrossFit does this.
Right.
So if you're going to show that, if you really want to be definitive in showing that CrossFit does this and there's no argument about it, you need to create an experiment and design an experiment where it's completely bomb-proof. You need to have measurable, observable, measurable and objective outcomes where the data shows definitively that this is what's happening.
Right.
It can't be self-reported data, in my opinion, because this is happening sort of willy-nilly through media already as we have it. With all the CrossFit media out there, this is essentially happening already with testimonials.
Right.
So if we know that there is a conjecture out there already, right? Or and maybe even a hypothesis of building evidence observationally and anecdotally that CrossFit improves people's health.
Right.
Within the gym, we, even using something like Beyond the Whiteboard, you could get into some serious data, and you could actually use, the measure of work capacity across broad times and modal domains, and you could hold that up against, people's blood pressure if you had the data for that, and you could show that the outcome of increasing your work capacity across broad times and modal domains ends up in you lowering your blood pressure, and therefore this is the cause of you coming off your blood pressure medication. That would be a really objective way of showing that CrossFit leads to people coming off of their medication, as an example. But the self-reported aspect of it makes it hard to believe that this is replicable, which is in the end the main thing that we're always looking for in a scientific study is to its worth. Is like, can you replicate this across many different populations, many different scenarios? Can you replicate these results?
Yeah. And I mean, I like to double down on the reason it being not particularly important. It's just like, we do have many studies showing that being more fit and working out in any form really decreases medication use. Like that's not
pretty common knowledge.
Yeah, I mean it's like across almost all forms of fitness. Like if you're doing some versus none, you're like, great. So like, what is the deeper importance of that? I think the claim would need to be something that's like so much so, and it would need to be such hard evidence to the specific training methodology of CrossFit that's what would make it a more meaningful thing to state. I mean, you could have you could walk up to any physician and be like, hey, will being more active and exercising more help me get off medication than not? And they'd most likely be like, yeah, like
exactly.
Barring some specific things. So I think that's one of the big points of it. But like when it comes to studies, the what is the value of studies? Because I mean, like the way I've always seen exercise science, especially, is it tends to be telling us what works, or sorry, telling us why something works that we've known works for 20 years. So it's never, from my perspective, been something where it's like we have this revelation and then we put that into practice and we're like, whoa, it's more like it's the observation of something that's been going on that then we look closer and it explains why something is happening. So what do you think the importance of of studies and things like this are in our space and in what we're doing?
In our space or just in general? I mean, I think in general, science is just to accumulate objective knowledge, right? And the more objective knowledge that you can accumulate, the more definitive you can be in predicting things and predicting outcomes. And that's going to help in almost um, every line of work that's valuable. A valuable thing to have is predicting outcomes. So specifically for us, the value of any science that might come out, it would be measured by our ability to get people results and get people healthier and so on and so forth. That this is the goal of what we do as coaches, right? We want to get people health and fitness. There is the value. So this is why, you heard Greg in the early days talk a lot about how much he hated exercise science, is because he wasn't using the things that were coming out in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning to help him get his clients fitter. He was using a prescription that he created, and he was doing it better than anything he found in any scientific journal. Right. So, and you're totally right, is like, it tends to be in our industry that the practitioners are at the cutting edge of the science in the gym. And then the quote unquote science, the academic science, sort of work backwards from what they see us doing. And then they try to find out what the root of that might be. And I would even go further to say that, in exercise physiology and strength and conditioning, and from an academic standpoint, is like the papers that I see come out. I used to hold a CSCS, and so I had a subscription to the National Strength and Conditioning Journal, and I still get like summaries in my email every couple months of some of the papers going out, and I'll scroll through, and like 99.99% of it is useless information to me as a coach.
Well, yeah, so I mean, that's the fascinating thing for me, is like when I sit and I see stuff that comes out, I read stuff that comes out, I try to see. I mean, even like with the biohacking world, that like you've got this fascination with the people like the Hubermans of the world, or you've got the Peter Attias, whose like whole world is this like digging into the nuance of physiology and psychology when it comes to sport and performance and well-being and like there's so many things that are said and so many studies that are brought up that make outrageous claims. Like they'll say something so definitively, and I'm like, how the fuck can you say that so definitively when it's like the depth of how studies are done and the variables that humans present are so vast. I mean, there's great studies, they exist, but I think beyond that, when I look at some of the data, like they'll speak with such force about, hey, you do this one thing and it's going to have, it's going to make everything else better. But then you look at even if you look within the study and you like see how much better, it's like 0.07% better on top athletes. And you're like, what the hell are you talking about? Why does that matter? Like, this doesn't matter for 99% of humanity. Like you're talking about, maybe maximizing like a single individual. I don't know. I find I wrestle so deeply with any of the depth of it being presented to the larger world. It's like, dude, sleep more if you can, eat well, like real foods, and do hard physical things. And like, there you go. Do that often. Have fun. I mean, create spaces where that happens more organically. It's like
exactly. It's the Pareto principle of 80-20, right? It's like 20% of the stuff you do can get you 80% of the results. And that's what Greg was so good at, right? Of creating this methodology of, sure, there's some little things that you can do outside CrossFit to like truly optimize your fitness. You trained and competed at the CrossFit Games. That principle was most apparent to me as I transitioned from games athlete to just dad, normal
Yeah.
training, because I'm almost as fit as I was, and I spend about a tenth of the time in the gym. You know,
You're like, huh? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
very
Yeah, yeah,
interesting. Yeah, but yeah, and part of the whole, you got to remember too, is that in academic science, like the incentive that a lot of these people have within that world is to like keep their jobs as well, and a lot of it hinges on whether or not they're publishing things. So I get the sense that sometimes they just publish things that don't matter to get a paper out. I
right.
think that happens probably more often than we'd think, rather than something of value. But
Yeah.
but yeah, so
I think if nothing else, it spurs conversation. So
mhm,
I think studies are wonderful, even if they're deeply flawed, to spur conversation and to
mhm,
have some sort of like uh, argument against, right? Like, so like, hey, let's have a banter back and forth about the importance of foot position in a squat. Studies show,
right,
you know, and like,
yeah,
okay, how is this study done? Let's unpack it, and okay, why could that be the case? And it forces, I think it forces a depth of thought that you wouldn't normally go to, because someone will
yes,
present something with some evidence behind it, and then you have to, if you're intelligent and you want to have more understanding, you have to unpack it a bit. And I think that to me has always been the value, is like, how can I look at a study and then use that to spur my own curiosity around like how does this all work, or how can I pick this apart, or how can I not? Wow, that's really solid evidence.
hmm hmm
I really appreciate the depth of that. I think it's
totally,
so easy to listen to stuff, especially like this paper, for instance. Like, we want this to be true, and we kind of anecdotally, like we said, know this to be true. So we
hmm
see it and it's in our space, and we go, cool, you know, like, we're good. We're gonna now run with this.
yeah.
But I really, that's why I wanted to have this chat with you. Is I apprecited you're like, cool, but like, let's have that conversation. And so you wrote the weakest form of evidence, and I don't know if you have your little
I do
email
have it.
you sent me
Yeah,
here,
yeah, I have it here.
but why don't you go through each one of those pieces for me? Like, so this paper uses subjective. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so this paper uses subjective observational data from a survey filled out by CrossFit participants. So I mean, so here the way that I think of it is this: is that the best form of data is you make an observation, and then you measure it with a tool that can give you a measurement down to, hopefully, um, hopefully it has some sort of well characterized error. For example, like if you measure the weight of an apple on a scale, any scale, you'd expect that the more expensive scale will have less error, right? And then you'd
You'd
think
hope so.
that the cheaper one, right, would have a little bit more error. And so, but they're going to be within the same range when you measure the weight of the apple. And if the experiment is talking about the average weight of Fiji apples, right? You're hopefully going to choose the more expensive one because you're going to get more accurate data. There's less error within that scale. Now, so if you extrapolate that out and you zoom out into how much error could potentially be in an observational study where you've got self-reported answers filled out by these participants. Now, in order to figure out how much error there is in these answers, I need to know exactly what's going on in your brain, which is
Right.
impossible.
Right.
If I need to predict, if I need, or guess what it is that you're thinking as you're writing something to a sheet of paper, like, all bets are off. It's almost impossible to analyze anything at that point and then
Right.
start to make actual conclusions about it.
Right. Yeah.
What becomes more valuable in these scenarios is if you and where this experiment could potentially become more important is if we had a well-designed control. Then things
Yeah.
become more interesting because then you become more curious about the answers that these participants are filling out. as an example, and so because that's one thing that I think I put in here was that it didn't have a control. That was the second big point. So
Yeah, that was the second big
I
one.
know
Was
I'm
no
skipping
control.
ahead a little bit,
No,
but
it's all good. It's all good.
um,
Yeah.
how the evidence would be a little stronger is if you had the same questionnaire sent out to a whole bunch of people from Good Life,
Right.
and now you're
Right.
comparing two different types of exercise, and the intention is to show that, as you said before, that CrossFit maybe has a larger effect on the outcomes of people reporting less medication use.
Yeah.
Right, but that starts to become interesting, and then further studies kind of go down that road of,
Yeah.
okay, well, maybe there is something to this whole CrossFit thing, because compared to exercise, which we know is already beneficial for health, CrossFit seems, according to these people who filled out the questionnaire, compared to the people from, and I'm using Good Life. I know Good Life is just like your run of the
Barry's boot camp or
mill.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, not Barry's boot camp, because that's like classes. It's like a machine gym. Your classic.
Gotcha.
What do they call it in the States there? What's the
Well,
big?
just like a normal gym, like a 24-hour
Yeah,
fitness.
yeah, 24-hour fitness, exactly.
Yeah. Got it.
So that's how you could potentially strengthen some of the data, is by putting in the controls,
Yeah.
or at least make it more interesting.
Yeah.
But so that's one point. The
Okay.
paper also doesn't say how many surveys were sent out and not answered. So
Right.
that weakens the data even further, because they only reported on the number of surveys that were filled out.
Right.
Now, and then it kind of leads you to believe that everyone filled it out who it was sent to. So you can imagine, like in your head, an entire CrossFit gym was sent this survey, and if only 50% of people filled it out, what is going through their head when they receive this paper and they fill it out? It could be plausible that they're the only people that are excited to share with the world that they got off their medication. But then the other people,
Totally.
right, like, and then the other 50% of the gym that didn't fill it out, they're like, oh fuck, I'm actually increasing my medication on cross.
Right.
Since I started CrossFit, I won't fill this out. It's not what they're looking for.
Right.
So again, you need to make more assumptions, because there was a lack of it just wasn't as thorough as it could have been.
Totally.
The
I mean,
next
that
point,
kind of falls in the same line
yeah,
of the bias, like you're talking about. Those people could be more the bias towards experienced CrossFit athletes, like
that's right.
they're likely experienced because they've had a great experience, and they've also probably been more committed and had more success,
Yeah,
and they're likely
exactly.
to credit CrossFit with that success, so speak
That's right.
highly of it.
Yeah, table one, it has the CrossFit training background of the participants, and I'm looking at it here. It's like 50% of the participants, 30% were over 4 years, 2 to 4 years. So the as you go through the different categories, increasing in time. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, you've got it right there. Yeah, you can see at the very bottom the totals.
Yeah.
Less than 6 months, 10%. As you go across the board and time increases, so does basically the percent.
Yeah. I
So yeah,
think in
so
addition to that,
go ahead.
no, I was just it just feels like it fits right in almost the same spot you were talking about with the last one, where it was just like that's just
Exactly.
it's biased, and
Yeah,
it doesn't tell the full story really.
yeah, it makes it feel like more of a testimonial,
Yeah.
right? Like, fill out this testimonial and tell me, how great CrossFit is, almost.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right, which we have in spades. Then
So what's
they
this?
start.
The quantitative statistics. I talk to me about that. What they use a
Yeah,
quantitative statistical analysis
it's
tool.
just when you're creating. So when you have these observational self-reported studies and people start filling out answers, the way that you typically measure them is you bring things into categories, and you need to almost arbitrarily. I mean, you can refine things down, but you arbitrarily assign, um, you start to arbitrarily assign different values to the categories that participants filled out. So let me just find I'm going to scroll down here because
Oh,
it tells you
gotcha. So
exactly how they
basically,
used
because
it.
it's like because they're reporting qualitative responses, but then
Mm-hmm.
they're using a quantitative tool to analyze
Yes,
it. It's like
exactly.
using it's trying to put numbers to emotions, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so a Spearman here. It says on page 6, a Spearman's rank correlation analysis was employed to assess the impact of training years and weekly training duration on the outcomes of questions featuring deductive approaches. So basically, they're taking the self-reported quantitative data, which is it's self-reported how often they train and how
Hmm.
long they've been training. So you could argue, okay, well, this is a little bit more concrete because people should know how long they've been training for. So then they're
Yeah.
going to put down like 5 years. Okay, great. Now we have like an actual number. They've been training for 5 years, and then they're gonna compare that against the outcomes of the questions that they asked about the medications. And so then in the medications, all the questions come up of what, again, it's going back. It's like now I need to guess of what they're thinking to come up with these numbers of either my medications went down or I'm off medication. But what does that mean? Does it mean that they reduced the total number of medications they take? Is it going to reduce the dose of each medication? What if I added a medication into uh, my med protocol, and the reason I added it was because it got me off another one,
Right.
or got me off two. So now it's like a 2-for-1. Or what if I got off of one and the other three increased? Like,
Right.
right. So how are they defining it? Because it seems as though, based on the questions, which are reported in the tables, they'll give you the questions at the top.
Table 6.
Table 6, table 3.
Table 3.
Yeah, medications, medical conditions. No, sorry. Yeah, you might be right. Medication change in medication usage is in table 4.
Got it. No change. Reduced by half. Eliminated completely. No answer.
Right? It seems super broad, and
Yeah.
there can be a lot of
There's just a lot of variance
misinterpretation,
there.
a lot
Yeah,
of
and there's
variance.
a lot of things that could go strange there.
So
So okay,
they're taking this analysis that basically that works really well with, with it's going to give you, it's a mathematical formula that's going to give you a correlation between two numbers, but the only way that coefficient, the Spearman's coefficient rank, comes out and you can actually say that that has any value is if the data itself doesn't have any bias within it, right? It's only
right,
the analysis is only as strong as the data itself, and the data is quite
right,
weak. And that goes for the same thing as the chi-squared test. So
got
the
it.
chi-squared test is the analysis that they're using. So I put they use a chi-square test to analyze the categorical data. However, this only works if the definitions of the data collection are predetermined and measured consistently across populations. The subjectivity of recall to answer survey questions weakens an already weak analysis. Like if you go down to, they use the chi-square test to analyze the relationships. It says this is a quote from their discussion, not the discussion in the section 2.3 data analysis. A chi-square test was employed to determine the relationships between categorical variables, specifically examining association between the frequency of training sessions per week and the reduction of medication usage. It's much of the same thing.
Right, right.
Um, so then we get into the control, and we talked a little bit about that already.
Yeah,
The question becomes more important, or the data becomes more important, when if you have something to compare it to that might be of interest.
Right.
One other thing that I thought might be super interesting, I wrote it here at the bottom here. One of the controls that they could have used was it would be a questionnaire that asked the exact opposite questions
Oh yeah.
to it, maybe to like separate groups, so they were blind to each other, separate
Yeah.
groups of CrossFitters in the UK. Like, have you ever had surgery because of CrossFit?
Right.
Have you increased your medication since you started your CrossFit membership? Right?
Yeah, I mean, because if you had that the flip side of that data, it would really serve to strengthen the correlations we're seeing between the reduction in it. So like if you had the flip side of the data supporting a very similar thing, it's like, okay, that's just more information in favor of it.
Exactly.
Because you'd have, again, I think it's just weak overall volume of information, the way it was all done and all set up. And like you said, like there's many little things that could have done to strengthen the overall realness of the study.
Yeah,
Or
I
depth of the
think it was,
study, I
yeah,
should
it
say.
was a good, like, it's definitely, it's a good thought. And I think someone could take the idea of this and, run with that and do it just a little bit better. Maybe, I mean, uh, these are always limited studies like this and stuff due to funding and stuff. I don't know if they ran out of funding and they couldn't, send out more, they couldn't send out more questionnaires and stuff. But that's another thing I would have really liked to see, is just like the actual questionnaire. Like, what did it look like when you got it in your email? Like,
Yeah.
if I'm gonna start to predict what's going on in your head as you're answering these questions, it'd be nice to see what you actually received.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what kind of bias is actually in the questionnaire itself that's causing you to think a certain way as you're writing the answers down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all in all, again, we probably think that this is correct.
Yeah,
I
agreed.
think it's the we from anecdotally speaking, and just like there is a lot of data supporting increase in quality of life by doing constantly varied functional movements exceed your high intensity, and an
Yes.
increased quality of life tends to be a decrease in medications that you're using in order to support a lower quality of life. And not to support a lower quality of life, to to negate the the maleffects of sedentary life, I should say. But the I think the value in a paper like this would be to have the conversation around it. Like it would be like, okay, cool, we've started this conversation. Let's look closer. Let's challenge this information and let's look closer. And then maybe this is like a study that pops up that someone sees who has the ability to fund and says, let's take it deeper, and we go further into it. But it must be just like a surface level thing. It's like it feels very much like a men's health analysis, where you're like, I asked a couple guys on the street and they told me, and you're like, fuck,
Yeah.
dude, like that's not, that's how
Well,
you get abs.
and it's also,
So
I'm looking through the discussion, and I'm like, they put a lot of work into the discussion, and a lot of the stuff in there, I'm enjoying reading, because I'm like, they're talking about chronic disease, and they cite a lot of studies where there are benefits to CrossFit, and they show specifically like CrossFit increases cardiovascular fitness. Like, if you scroll, page 17, page 16 at the bottom, the discussion starts, and then they talk about medication and like implications for medication costs on healthcare and the
yeah,
medical intervention, and they talk about just all the great benefits of, what does it say here, like medical intervention. Previous research suggests that regular weekly exercise, accounting to 5 to 6 hours per week, can help individuals reduce the need for medical intervention. So it's like it has the feel of just like a well done blog post, kind of.
yeah.
That's just, like, it's almost like an opinion piece a little bit,
Which would be great if it
which
was
is
phrased
great.
as such.
Yes,
Like
exactly,
I think
exactly.
that's where both you and I had our issues with it. Is like
Yeah.
when we saw it, we were like, "This is all great. This is wonderful stuff." But it
Hmm.
should be phrased as like, this should be the script of a YouTube video. Like,
Hmm.
we did all this and it came out with this, and it like
Right.
and not to be
Yeah.
confused with something that is as hard of evidence as what it, because it's like clinical when you look at it. Like, so you're like, okay, this is Like I can cite this. So that's why I wanted to have the conversation with you, is to give credence to the fact that we do probably believe this is true, but there is value in looking deeper at it and being like, this is not the greatest support. Like this isn't done well enough for us to hang our hat on and go with it.
It also talks to the importance of actually doing stuff like this, what we're doing, because if you just take it at face value and read the abstract and you're only reading their conclusions,
right?
The conclusions actually aren't over the top. Like in the conclusion, they wrote, in summary, the results of this study suggest that CrossFit training may be associated with a reduced need for medical interventions, potentially alleviating some of the economic burden of chronic disease in the NHS. While our findings do not demonstrate causality, they indicate a possible link between CrossFit participation and lower medication usage.
Right.
Yeah, like it definitely, I could agree with that. But again, I could have come up with that conclusion from everything that we've seen on Instagram, on Beyond the Whiteboard, etc. Back to the importance of it, right? The weight of it, and so on. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for us to do this again when another study comes out supporting what we do.
Yeah.
Because I think it's always good to unpack these kinds of things and just like have the conversations around them. Because we don't want to just, I don't know. I think it's so easy in today's day and age to see something that supports your belief structure and just run with it. And I think if there's a place to not do that, it's our CrossFit. Like CrossFit is by design, it should be challenged all the time. And we should always be asking why. Like, why are we doing this? Like we should be questioning high intensity and being like, hey, would it be better at low intensity? Yeah, it feels way better. But unfortunately, it doesn't have the results are going. Like I think it's inherently built into the program of a constant re-examining. So if you're a coach and you're out there and you're just like seeing stuff and just running with it, I think it leads you to being more incorrect than correct. So I would sit with stuff and examine it and unpack it, even if it supports our overall ideas of what we're currently doing. So
that's what it means to be results driven, right?
Exactly. And that's why we do what we do and are the best. Not you and I specifically, but the program of CrossFit.
I think you're pretty good though, Pat.
I think you're pretty good, Pete. Thank you for watching. And if you found that helpful and you want more of this kind of content, we have literally hundreds of videos just like this, from practical tips and tricks to theory to everything in between, all in the knowledge. And if you want to learn from me directly and our cohort of level 4 staff members, then we also have the Knowledge Pro, which we do weekly calls and live interaction and homework and everything else in between. If you want any more information or would like to have a free trial of the knowledge, please click the link in the description below and get after it.